If you know that you need to start a budget, but you dread managing your finances, you might be able to relate to this mom. She wrote, I'm pregnant and we've never budgeted before. We're not in a terrible situation, but we're definitely not where we want to be. But with our baby coming soon, I know it's something we desperately need to do. The problem is, every time I think about sitting down to do our finances, I get this overwhelming feeling of dread. Between work, doctor's appointments, and feeling exhausted all the time, I keep putting it off. How do you start a budgeting habit when it already feels overwhelming? Well, I can totally relate to the feeling of like not really knowing where to start and having this huge mental block when you're trying to figure out what to do with your finances, especially when you're trying to start a new habit. But I'm really proud of you for recognizing that this is really important and that you need to start developing this skill now that you are anticipating your baby, because once you have this habit really well established, it's going to be so much easier for you when it comes to managing your finances. Now, will there still be challenges involved with like navigating life? Yes, but it's so much easier when that habit is already established, which is what we're going to talk about here today. So, your goal is creating a budgeting habit, but you do have quite a few obstacles and challenges from what I heard you write in your question. So, one is this huge mental block that you have that is preventing you from taking action because your body actually is set up to protect itself. And if it's dreading doing an activity, it makes your mind recognizes that, your body recognizes that as you're unsafe to actually take that action. So it's trying to protect you from actually budgeting because you have this overwhelming feeling. And it may be that you have some like fear and anxiety on like what you may uncover or what you may end up finding regarding your financial status. Now, you did say in your message that, you're I think you had said, how did you write it? We're not in a terrible situation. So I'm assuming then that like you're probably not living paycheck to paycheck, but maybe it is something that you're just like, oh, I don't think we're quite as, where we should be. And so if that is the case, your body's trying to protect you from coming to that realization if you are going to feel unsafe doing your finances. So we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but you also said that you're exhausted all the time, so you keep putting it off. So from these two challenges, those are the big things we're going to address today in our conversation is the mental block that you have when it comes to like actually doing your finances, as well as figuring out a really simple solution. So that way, when you are feeling exhausted, you can still create a habit that is going to be really successful for you, especially in this season of time and going into motherhood where you're not going to have, a huge block of time where you can like sit down and budget every day or every week. That's just may not be very realistic for you. So with those two obstacles in mind, we're going to go ahead and figure out a best plan to hopefully allow you to have success when it comes to creating your budgeting habit. So let's first address the mental block that you have about this overwhelming feeling of dread, which we kind of already briefly touched on. But when you have a certain belief in your mind creates pathways in your brain that when you believe something, it's going to default to that pathway. Our brain is really good at conserving as much energy as possible. I can like go way down the rabbit hole in all of the like psychology, but I will kind of like try and keep it super simple for you today. And that is, so since our brain is trying to protect our body and it's trying to make sure that we survive and it's trying to conserve as much energy as possible, if we have a belief or an opinion or a certain mindset about something already, it's going to naturally always follow that path because that path is already set, especially if we already have a reality of what we've experienced that then matches that belief. It makes it really hard to separate out and say, no, I'm not going to believe, or I'm not going to continue down this path anymore. I'm going to choose a different path to follow. So I first just want to like recognize how challenging the mindset can be around creating a new habit, especially when you already have all of these like pathway set up in your brain that has this certain connotation and belief already in mind for it. So if you have tried to create a budgeting habit in the past and it has been really challenging for you and you felt all of this like overwhelming feeling when you go to sit down and do a budget, then because the physical reality experience matched what you believed, your brain is going to like solidify that thought in place. So what we need to do is when we create a new train of thought, we need to try and actually facilitate the reality of what we experience in our natural environment to then validate the thought process that we are trying to now get in the mindset of. So if you're trying to go from the fact of you're feeling like, oh, budgeting is so hard, I need to establish habit, but habits around budgeting are really hard. It's really hard for me to manage my finances. It's not simple. It's overwhelming, all of these negative thoughts and connotations. And you're then trying to create a completely new mindset around your finances where like, oh, it's really simple, or I can do this and it's not that hard and it doesn't need to take a long time, right? Your brain is going to reject all of those new thoughts because it has not met your actual reality of what you have experienced, and it's going to reject that as a lie. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. It just means that this is a new path and a new thought process, and you need to be able to set up your actual environment to then validate these new thoughts and experiences for your brain to then say, oh, this is safe. This is the new thought process that I'm going to go forward thinking and then not go on that default path where there's all of this negative connotation. First of all, I just want to recognize that this is a lot more than just establishing a new habit for budgeting. Like this is like a lot of like new brain work that you are actually doing. So I think that sometimes people get in this, like people that don't have these same struggles kind of might like think like, well, it's not that hard, like just do it. Well, it is really hard because we got to retrain our brain, and that takes a lot more effort because we also have to have experiences that then validate the new things that we are trying to teach our brain. So if you're trying to go the route of, I can create a budgeting habit, I can be successful at this, we need to then create not obstacles, create a validation in your actual reality of your life to then cement that into your brain. So here are some things that I recommend for you given what you have written in and your specific situation. So that is like the mindset thing that we need to do, but let's like set that aside for a second and then talk about creating a habit. So when you create a habit, to be really successful with creating a habit, you want to tie that new action to an action that is already established in your life. So when we think about like, oh, there's something new that we need to do, lots of people tend to default to like setting a reminder on their phone or using alarms or something like that. Well, that really only gets you so far, right? Like if you need a reminder every day to like brush your teeth, then it is not a habit, right? Reminders and alarms are a lot better for like one-off situations, like, oh, you have like this one bill that you don't typically have on a month-to-month basis and you don't want to forget that you need to pay it and there's an upcoming due date. That's when it might make more sense to set an alarm or a reminder in your phone. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a habit, and what we want to do to create a system that then makes it feel really natural for you is to pair it with something that you're already doing in your life. So for example, my budgeting habit, the thing that I started to do because I needed a different system for my own life, is every day when I would go to work, I would usually get to work like 10, 15 minutes early. And that's like downtime, right? Like I can't quite start work yet. Like I've noticed that I was just like wasting it. I was looking for a new place for me to put my own budgeting habit in a better place and spot in my routine. So I was like, okay, I'm going to now make my budget habit be when I get to work and I sit down because I get there early, I will budget for 10 to 15 minutes until work starts. So I'm now then tying that new action to an action that I'm taking very regularly, very systematically in a certain section of my life. So if it's for you, you could say, okay, every every night after dinner, I will sit down and work on my budget for 15 minutes. I want you to think of what do you do on a fairly normal basis that is already something that is part of your everyday life and experience that you do every single day. It doesn't have to be at the exact time every day. Like you don't eat breakfast at 9 o'clock every day. Like sometimes you might eat breakfast at 10, or, you might eat breakfast at 7, right? But let's say you eat breakfast every day. So if you're tying that new habit to the same action, then it's going to then take place in your normal routine. You're setting up a system where it feels much more natural for you because you're tying it to a habit that you already do. So the formula is when I do blank, then I will, whatever your new habit is. So think about what that might look for you, what might be realistic. Like I mentioned, like mine is when I get to work, I will sit down at my desk and work on my budget for 10 to 15 minutes. So if yours is, after dinner, where if that's very realistic for you, you could say, okay, Monday through Friday after dinner, before I do the dishes or clean up the kitchen, I will work on my budget for 10 to 15 minutes. I would just encourage you to figure out where does that look like in your life, and then actually write out if you need to put pen to paper, because when you put pen to paper and you see those words in front of you, it feels like a written contract to your brain to say, oh, this now is in paper. I'm solidifying this action, this intention of what it is that I'm going to do. The other thing you want to keep in mind too is that because you have felt this big overwhelming feeling of dread, like you've built this up, this huge dreadful momentum in your brain, you need to make really tiny micro habits. So you need to make it super simple for your brain to say, hey, this is simple, this is easy, this is not overwhelming, right? If you're feeling a huge amount of anxiety or stress, just sitting down 3 minutes tops. What we're trying to do is we're trying to validate and create a safe experience to then validate this new pathway that we're creating in your brain to establish that this habit is safe and healthy and something that you then now your brain can very easily flow towards doing, because it's going to try and create a new pathway. It's like cutting through the woods where there's no trail. If there's no path there, you're going to get tangled in a group of weeds and thistles, and you don't know where to step, and you don't know which way to turn exactly, right? So this is why it's really important for when you start establishing a habit that if you're feeling a whole bunch of this anxiety, this fear, this dread hanging over to you when you just sit down to start working on your budget, then you need to take it in really tiny steps. And you need to make sure that you're celebrating each step that you do, right? Your brain has to create a completely new path for it to be established that, hey, it's okay to do this. Pay big attention to what you're feeling in your body. Your body will let you know, right? You just might feel stress or overwhelm, right? I know that you already recognize those signs because you basically said you feel that overwhelming feeling of dread. So pay attention to that when you start this habit. Now, if you don't feel that when you sit down, then I want you to start aiming for I want you to start initially at 5 minutes. If you're not feeling that, then I want you to try and work up to 15 minutes. I don't want you doing any more than 20 minutes a day, because what we want to do is, again, we're trying to validate this physical experience to this new habit that we're creating. And budgeting is like laundry. There are different methods, and different moms have different systems that they swear by, right? Some moms are I can only tackle laundry once a week and I just devote the whole day to it, and it takes several hours, but it's done for the rest of the week. I don't have to worry about it. Whereas other moms are well, I don't have that time. That feels really overwhelming to me. I would much rather do one load a day. I can manage that, right? So for you, you need to figure out what makes sense for you. And given what you've already kind of said in your history, I am really recommending that more that one load a day system for you. So that's why I say I don't want you to be spending any more than 20 minutes a day on your budget. And if you're okay, 5 days a week is realistic for you, because let's say you are pairing it with a task that lines up very well with your work week but doesn't really flow into your weekend. That's okay too. Okay, give yourself grace while you're establishing this new habit. You're gonna have days that don't work, right? Just like I have days that I don't go to work, I don't sit down, so then I don't do my budget, and that's okay. The next time I go to work, I sit down, I get there early, I work on my budget then, and then, my habit continues, because going to work is a normal part of my, weekly experience. So don't be super concerned if you fall off a day because you didn't the habit that you're trying to pair with your new budgeting habit you didn't happen to do. But that is also why it's super important that you're tying your new habit to something that you do fairly regularly. That's not just a like, oh, well, on Sunday, at some point on Sunday, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to work on my budget. No, that's like way too vague. Even if you say, well, it's Sunday at 2 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and do my budget. Like, again, that's not quite enough for establishing a new habit, especially when we want to make sure that we're also trying to rewire our brain when it comes to what we believe about the budget habit that we're trying to create. Now, as you start to develop your budgeting habit, it's going to ideally start to become a little bit more systematized. So when I say systematized, I really like to think about like the finances and how I run my home as a business. So in a business, one of the things that we tend to typically think about is a plan, do, evaluate, and improve process. So it's a circle, right? You plan your action, you do your action, then you evaluate the action you just took, and then you improve on how all of that implementation went. Okay. So this is going to be something that you're going to like start evaluating as you go through and work through a budgeting habit. You'll start to figure out a system that's going to really work for you. But as you go through creating and establishing your new budget, there's always going to be challenges that pop up. So just kind of keep that in mind, that is part of the process. I want to kind of like forewarn you, like don't get too discouraged when you get to, in the process of creating your budget and going through and managing your budget, that is normal. But the other thing that I also want to address here is when there are spurts of like large amounts of energy, especially that you'll experience going through pregnancy. So when you have the energy, you go through the first 20 minutes and you're like, hey, I feel really good. Like I'm totally on board doing a little bit more. Like you have developed this pattern in your brain where you start now feeling very confident in your habit. Like you're not sitting down feeling this dread. You're not sitting down and feeling like your anxiety, start to creep up. When you have more energy and you have built up a better, healthier relationship with this habit that you're creating, that's when I want you to start kind of thinking about implementing a little bit more time for those bigger tasks that are going to take more than 20 minutes, right? Now, the reason why I don't want you to kind of sit down and like think about tackling these really big tasks at the beginning is, again, we need that real life validation to validate the new pathway that we are establishing in our brain. But once we have some history and some confidence of saying like, oh yeah, I can do this. This isn't super hard. Like this is just part of my normal everyday routine. Then once we have that confidence, then we can say, okay, yeah, I have more energy or I have more time and I can tackle something that takes a little bit longer. But as soon as you start feeling fatigued from whatever that task is, that is your sign to stop. Especially if you're a task-oriented person like I am, like that is the task, right? It's not completing it and it taking like 3 hours and then you get to the end of your 3 hours and you're just like, I never want to do that task again, right? Like if I do it, I have to do it perfectly and it has to be complete. Like that's the mindset, that's the rabbit trail that I have gone down on as a perfectionist, okay? So if you naturally tend that way, I'm telling you, please, that is not your instructions, okay? Your instructions are figure out when you're feeling more energy, when you're feeling super confident, figure out and set a certain limit so that way you're not pushing yourself past the point of exhaustion and fatigue. Because when you go into the point of exhaustion and fatigue, then when the reality of what you've experienced then doesn't match what your brain is believing or choosing this new pathway to like create this mindset on, it's then going to create this disconnect, and then you're going to have more challenge, more obstacle, more mental obstacle the next time you sit down to do this budgeting habit that you're trying to create. So when you get to experiencing any sense of hesitancy, that's when you need to stop so that way you can be successful in the long run. Now, with any habit, one thing that's really going to help is to make sure you celebrate your success. And when I say celebrate your success, that doesn't mean like, oh, I've budgeted or created this budgeting habit and I've done it for 21 days and now it's a habit, now I can celebrate. No, as soon as that task is complete, you celebrate. And that's going to, again, create this validation in your brain. I can create self-confidence in myself that I can fulfill this new habit. So you're going to celebrate. Okay, whether it's a pat on your back or if it's like a, yay, I did it because I remember to actually like that this is my, time to sit down and do my budget. Whatever it is, if it's okay, I'm going to reward myself with, I don't know, like putting like little stickers on a chart or, a piece of candy after I complete my task, which I'm like me, I have a really bad sweet tooth. So I really try not to like give myself like a food reward because that's a slippery slope for me. But whatever yours is, whether it's like, again, patting yourself on the back and saying like, hey, you did this, you accomplished what you intended to do, yay. Like that's what you need to do to celebrate after every single time that you have accomplished the prompt of what's in your normal everyday life, plus the new habit that you're establishing, okay? I think sometimes we get in our brain, milestones have to be like 21 days or 30 days or 3 months. Like those are great. Like it's great to celebrate those bigger milestones, but when you're establishing a new habit and you're starting to work these little micro habits towards your large goal, you need to make sure that you're also celebrating after each individual step to teach your brain that it is okay, especially with all of these negative mindsets when it comes to like feeling super overwhelmed with your finances and, trying to establish that your brain can be safe and it can accomplish these new tasks and these new events in your life without it resulting in all of this like huge overwhelm and sometimes anxiety. If you have any questions about anything that we discussed, you're welcome to drop them in the comments below or submit a follow-up question via the link anonymously. But if you have gotten to this far in the episode, now it's your turn. I would love for you to join our conversation. Where in your day are you fitting in your time to budget? How are you choosing to celebrate those tiny micro steps that you're doing? But if you enjoyed this episode and you just are wanting to have more similar conversations, I'll link up a playlist similar to today's conversation for you to listen to next.